Ladies, gentlemen, dear sisters, dear brothers of the Spiritist ideal, dear friends who watch us on the internet through web TV of the United States Spiritist Federation, our wishes of much peace. Albert Camus, the Argentinian writer, who was the disciple of the Existential doctrine, had the opportunity to receive the Nobel Prize of Literature when he presented it during the Second World War, a work that influenced the sociology destiny of humankind, which is entitled The Stranger. To synthesize it, however, my own emotion, it's about the story of a man who did not have any emotions. He was in Argel, the capital of his country, which at the time belonged to France, when, in a beach, without any reason whatsoever, or maybe there was a reason, he began to argue with an Arab man. And during this argument, he stole the man's life of that stranger. But he didn't feel any remorse doing that, because right after, he went through a period of seeking, but an empty search of somebody and who did not have any alternative. He sought the authorities and asked them to invite him to be tried for the murder. So his mother passed away in a city in the inland, and in his doubt, he wasn't sure if he needed to honor the memory of his mother. He delayed to decide if he would go to her funeral or not, or if he would just arrive at the burial itself. His emotion was peculiar. When he was younger, he went to university, but he didn't experiment any joy or concern. Later, many aspects of his sexual relationships called out his attention. Without any emotions, he traveled to pay tribute to the memory of his mother. It was hot that day, and at that moment of her funeral was very unpleasant, because he was there looking at the corpse of his mother and didn't feel any affection towards her. In his opinion, she had not been a mother according to the other mothers, so he didn't nurture any affection towards her. But he had given the social witness the customary respect to society. And because the funeral was longer than a day, he left to go for a walk. He went to a matinee to the movie theater, and he had the opportunity to find a young woman with whom he had a connection, and soon after went to her apartment as if nothing had happened before. After the sexual relationship, he returned to the funeral, and the mother was buried. But he could nourish any feelings of longing towards her. So he returned to the capital and was invited to be accountable, to be tried for the crime that he had committed, There were witnesses because the crime had happened at the beach in front of many people. And he felt in the condition of a defendant, an interesting person. There was the people judging him. But who were these people that were going to judge him? There were some people that didn't have anything else to do. They went to attend the trial. And so in the courthouse, he noticed the bankruptcy of the laws. The judge was already wearing his tunic. The prosecutor was cruel. He didn't really concern himself with the crime. They asked him the truth while his mother was being buried. You went to have fun, romantic, and after that, you went on to have sex with an unknown woman. And he didn't really know what was true or not. He said half smiling, yes, this happened exactly as you stated. And you were not ashamed of it? Had you not practiced such an inappropriate act of this nature? He began to think, I'm being judged because I killed an Arab, or because I'm not a hypocrite. To say something that in fact, I don't feel. So it was at that moment in front of that courthouse that he discovered that he was a stranger in human society. He was the stranger. He was different. And the bitterness, the deep bitterness of Albert Camus is in the monologues of this character who's very bitter, empty, deeply unhappy. He didn't really care about the trial itself. If he was sentenced, he knew that murder received a condemnation. But if he were sentenced because he didn't go to see his mom, then she would have been sentenced as well because she wasn't a good mother. The truth is, at that moment in the courthouse, he looked at all the faces and their emotions. If there was a mirror, he could see that his face was a face that was apathic. There was no emotion. He was sentenced to the guillotine. He didn't get bothered by that. It was as if to say, go home. But right after, when he was taken to the guillotine, he looked at the scaffolding itself, which was presented in the Revolution of '89 by Jean Guillotin. He felt for the first time an emotion when the blade chopped down would make his head roll into a basket and his body would fall behind. For the first time in his life, he felt an emotion. And he would have liked that his life had had a different meaning, or would have been different. He would have liked to have loved. They say that love gives a strange feeling of satisfaction in life, and that the lack of love gives a strange feeling of dissatisfaction for life. He would have liked to have loved that woman, the mother, but also that woman, the young woman at the movie theater. Is love this important? To have something from someone who has nothing. So that he looked at those faces, anxious for his execution in the prison courtyard. And so he cried for the first time in his life. He cried. And the work, The Stranger by Albert Camus, is the true lesson of post-World War II. The existential philosophy presented by Jean-Paul Sartre and Madame Beauvoir is that life purpose of living today, the existence. It's a philosophy that does not take into account the yesterday and especially the tomorrow, because Sartre had been, he loved France, he was a philosopher, but when Paris was given to a German, opening its doors so it would not be destroyed, he began to take part in the inner revolutionary, in the sewage system of the city. And those revolutionaries, called the martyr sons, they created difficulties for the Third Reich. They carried out activities that bothered Vichy, that would in fact be the new capital of France under the Nazi occupation. So he was arrested. But he witnesses scenes that would remain unforgettable in his life during the war. He saw fathers offering their daughters in exchange for a chocolate bar. They did not want to go hungry. So the question of honor, dignity, is very superficial. It doesn't have an existence in and of itself. It doesn't support the weight. But he also saw priests of many religions who in those moments were rebellious and angry with God and were afraid of death. They are the ones who used to preach immortality. So when Sartre, when he has his relationship with Madame Gouveia, and when they each had their own home, it's the love without commitments, each one in their homes. So periodically they would meet one another as if they were two professionals who did not have an affectionate commitment. She used to write in a bitter way. She's the woman, and she relatively hates men, wishes her total liberation of women and the licentiousness as well. But he preached with some bitterness. What is ethic? What is dignity for? We talk about religion, that the kingdom of heaven and earth is the kingdom of hell. So let's live right now, because maybe if the bomb drops and everything ends, upon ending, well, everything else. The human creature ceases to exist. So then existentialism took over the planet. The culture and the traditions of the world began to be examined through the lens of a German thinker in Berlin, Herbert Marcuse. He went to Berkeley to teach in San Francisco Bay Area. And he said that that war had wiped out all the other wars. But that wasn't true, because a few years later, the United States would once again be involved in a war here called a dirty war, as if there was a clean war. And this assertion was the flowering, was to send the flower of youth of the Americans to the communists in the country of Korea. So it was necessary that Uncle Sam had to get young university students to kill. They had learned at the university how to save lives, but now Uncle Sam was pointing the finger. War. They didn't know what to do. When Herbert Marcuse began to say, don't make war, make love. And this voice took over first of San Francisco. Then it spread all over America, throughout the world. And the North American Constitution allows that the individual can oppose war thanks to its ethical values and religions, his cultural upbringing, etc. So the beatnik movement existed. Those who refused to kill, those who refused to transform the university campuses in a factory of destroyers of lives. So they began to live in a beatnik style, very liberal, because Herbert was a communist. And at that time in America, the word had a very terrible meaning, especially because of one man, Herbert Hoover. This man tried to deport, destroy any individual that would adopt the concept of communism. All the centers in the country had to expel who thought in the way of Marx or Trotsky. But to Herbert, there was nothing. And he was the type of guy who was Marxist, who had a duty, a task, to fight against tradition and to do the apology of lies. That's how it's stated in Wikipedia, to do the dissemination of illusion, therefore of lies, of fantasy. This fantasy, which is like a bubble, a soap bubble, which bursts and vanishes very soon. So he gave those 4 young men in Liverpool the chance to bring a new message, music. The blues was already very old in the streets of New York, in the coffee shops and the bars. Only the coloreds, who were the ones called at the time, the spiritual music was above it. It was necessary, a transformation. And normally in sociology, this change comes from poverty, who does music, which is the voice of misery or grandeur, or the voice of God, as you wish. So those 4 young men from Liverpool began to have music in a different way. They talked about their adventures. They were very joyful, the streets that they used to cross of their town. And in some way, they enchanted Liverpool. And 3 grounds below, 3 floors below, and one of them, John Lennon, who used to present an almost divine inspiration, offered us the song Yesterday and so many other romantic songs and very deep. He took the word beatnik and he gave the term to the group Beatles. So that's how they became known. England shook the dust of its Victorian age because the Victorian culture was also present in the United States. Here, there was the League of Decency, which was one of the most beautiful hypocrisies. The League of Decency was so careful to maintain dignity in Hollywood. One was disturbed. The kiss in Hollywood could not last more than 13 seconds. So it was measured, the length. So the League of Decency was always there with their conflicts, with their mental conflicts. The Victorian morals, which we are the heirs in Latin America, is very curious. To sin is sinful when people are aware of it. So the important thing is for people to not be aware of it. Sin with care. Nobody needs to know about it. Even when in church, in the Catholic Church, there's a Latin sentence that's very curious that used to say, do it, but as long as nobody finds out. So the question is not chastity itself, it's marriage. The vow is to not get married, but everything else is allowed, as long as people didn't find out. So a philosophy came up of a priest. Oh, this child is the offspring of the priest. Well, it is and it isn't. What do you mean? It's the child, but not really the child. But that was the philosophy. So a young woman, slender, she came as a model, Mary Quaint. And Mary Quaint changed the mentality of women. Fashion of the Decency League was that the skirt needed to be one palm below the knee. And so Mary paraded in the Albert Hall with a skirt above the knee. So the mini skirt was born. And that was a scandal, because soon after, the mini became micro skirt. And today there's not even a skirt. It's a funny thing. It's just a respectable blouse that grew a little bit. And now it's by the waist. But the tropical climate of Brazil couldn't resist. The respect of the long, horrible, it looked like a turtle on the beach, gave way to something very daring. 2 pieces. But in the beaches of Copacabana in Rio, 100 degrees, in the shadow, on the beach, the women couldn't endure. And they paid tribute to an island which the Americans tested the atomic bomb. They found the ideal attire, the bikini, paying tribute to that island where the atoll, where the atomic bomb tests were made. So the world went crazy. Went crazy with love. And so the young truck driver that had a very flexible waist appeared and sang, and he used to sing very well. And he took his guitar and started shaking his waist and his hips, and that was Elvis Presley. And America went crazy. The Beatles came and brought a film, The Yellow Submarine. It was startling. America had the habit of the time Bill Crosby, the very velvety voice, actually very similar to a voice of somebody who's going to sing soon for us. That warm, soothing voice to the ears that we close our eyes and we dream. Bing Crosby began to see this boy as an enemy. Italian, ugly, Frank Sinatra. But he was much wiser than Crosby. He created the fainting of the fans. And when he appeared in a beautiful commercial, some young women began to scream and faint. So the world went crazy. And the youth, the American youth, went from foxtrot to rock and roll. Fascinating. It was an immoral dance and music. The young women would escape home at night in order to go see rock and roll. But those young men from Liverpool brought rock, and soon in America, ice appeared in America and used to kill a cat. Kiss. Oh, right. And people used to go crazy. Metallica. This is the period which culminated in the 3 days of Woodstock. Sex, love, drugs, and rain. It was right here in New York. It was 3 days that set the world and killed the world of envy. But the insanity became larger, and somebody screamed, Friedrich Nietzsche, God is dead. And here now is where we're going to live intensely. The woman found her freedom. Everything began in a wonderful elaboration of the cigarettes. I'm not going to tell the brand, just so that you could guess how to sell cigarettes. If women began to smoke, we could sell them. Because cigarettes were prominent among men, to take a cigarette and to blow smoke in rings. It was something very extravagant. So it was an audacious television which was already honored with an Oscar. So Betty Davis was a dramatic actress, appears to the scandal of everyone, smoking a cigarette and smiling, because it was so feminine to inhale the smoke like the men, just being like men. After all, to catch the deficiencies of men were crazy to give up smoking because of cancer, because of the problems that smoking brings. 90 chemical substances are present in cigarettes. Sigmund Freud died of a cancer in his mouth because of his pipe. And so the propaganda against cigarettes began. But women adhered to it, because if Bette Davis can smoke in public in a film, then all the women would smoke too. And so today, more women smoke than men. And so after that came the need to have whiskey publicly. Before, they used to hide it because it was immoral, the Victorian hypocrisy. Especially a lady to drink whiskey. Maybe champagne is more elegant, it's more Parisian, but whiskey or cachaça. Here, I used to be envious. Cocktail is something that I don't know. When I discovered that the word cocktail also existed in my hometown, I was so ashamed. Which is cachaça and lime. In my town, it's called tail of a rooster. Somebody would order something. Cocktail is more fancy. How fancy. So I was one day in a social gathering in the city of Salvador, representing the manager of the government institution I used to work for. It was an employee, a garden party. So my name was in the newspapers. I was already then in the newspapers. You were present at the garden party. Mr. Divaldo Franco was going to pay tribute to the First Lady. Until I discovered that it was just a garden outside. And somebody told me, would you like a cocktail? And I said, yes. But when I touched it, I understood the cock. But the era of the empty men and women had begun, and full of nothingness, full of Victorian morals, full of illusions, of pleasures that couldn't be. And I will never forget that in this day, because I was taking a group of representatives to the first ladies. She was one of the first lady was one of the 10 most well dressed. The other ones were dressed with less clothing, but they were dressed just as well. And the police chief hated social life. And he said, Divaldo, you go in my place to represent me. And in order to represent a gentleman, there was an elegance so that you couldn't make fool out of ourselves.
Under my arm. And on one hand, people were smoking and holding a whiskey. And he was so elegant in the middle of the smoke. That was the best society in Salvador. And I by myself. And nothing worse than being by yourself in the middle of society. And so I would smile, fake smile to people, pretending that I was used to it. But it was my first time. And the entire high society moved that way. And it opened a corridor, and at the back, at the end, I saw a rich lady that would go to her Spiritist center. But she wouldn't say Spiritism. And she would also hide when she go. And she'd go take passes to kind of get the load off, so to say. And I was the person that would help her unload from all the challenges that she'll go to those parties, load up, and then she'll come to recover over there. And all of a sudden, I saw her and I was very happy. Because at least I would know someone at the party. And she was smiling, I smiled, And she saw me. When she saw me, she asked me a question. Hello, Divaldo. How great that you are here. They say that women are very curious. And she must be thinking, why is Divaldo Franco here? He's a Spiritist. And the Spiritists live in the shanty towns or helping out poor people. Why is he here? And she was curious. Of course, women are never curious. And so that we could strike up a conversation, she asked me with all kindness, hey, Divaldo, do we have it today? And I knew what she meant. But I wanted to pick on her a little bit and say, what do you mean? That thing that we go to. But that thing what? I asked. And then people were looking at her and me. And that happens to take place every day, every Thursday at 8 p.m. over there. And I said, oh. And that moment, the First Lady came out. And she was basically a walking jewelry store. And so she looked at me and said, your name? I said, Divaldo Franco. And she said, oh, are you the one that is that thing? I said, no, lady. People love being called lady, right? Because, you got to be polite. Always called ladies, ladies. Now, I'm here just representing our sheriff to respect you and honor you with this gift. She had a secretary with this gift. She wouldn't touch it, and I gave the little gift to her assistant. But aren't you the one who deals with those things? I'm like, me? No. What do you mean? I'm a public servant. But aren't you the one who's And I said, Spiritist, very low. Yes, ma'am. I am a Spiritist. I always had good lungs. And the entire auditorium, garden party stopped and turned around with their whiskeys and cigars and cigarettes, as if it were a horrible word. And I just went pale in emotion. And she said, yes, I have heard of that thing, the lady said. And I said, well, Spiritism is not a thing, and everybody turned around because who was I talking to the lady? And I said, Spiritism, as Allan Kardec defined, it's a science that studies the origin, the nature, and the destiny of the spirits, as well as their relationship with the physical bodies and the spiritual world. And as they turned around, and of course, I took advantage, and for a couple of minutes there, I went for it. And when I went for that, I had talked about Spiritism in the middle of all those people. And I smiled. They couldn't really clap because their hands were busy, but somebody started to click their glasses together. And then a famous person came over to our conversation and said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate myself for Mr. Franco because I too like these things. And that's a fatality, I said, and I left. And I left that I was leaving an empty world to the reality of social and true world. Later on, I would have the opportunity to read in a wonderful work published here in the United States by a psychologist and theologian, Dr. Rollo May, also a philosopher, who passed away 4 years ago. And he said that human beings are afraid of loving because nowadays they are enslaved by some psychosocial factors which cause this emptiness into beings. And so he talked about that these causes were consumerism, egotism, and sexism, and also our tendency to exhibit ourselves. 4 factors that work towards killing the family, to destroy traditions, and to turn human beings into just economic targets. And I reflected upon all of this, and I began to love the thought of Rollo May and study his philosophy, which was strongly ethical, theologian, and philosophical. And so human beings are more than their physical envelope. And later I read an extraordinary work by James Collins about human genome. On the 26th of June of the year 2000, in the White House during a special meeting, President Bill Clinton had the opportunity to share with the world through the media that now we know how God has created the world because of the human genome. Dr. Jim Collins had presented the treatise on the unraveling of the human genome, a task that was done together in 10 universities by more than 200 scientists over the last 20 centuries. And the conclusions were fascinating. We found out that human beings is the bearer of approximately 3 billion of different genetic codes. And each one of these lands under 4 pieces. So in fact we have 12 pieces of genetic codes that qualify us, that quantify us, and that give us dignity. The human genome was now decodified. And we found out that in human beings there were only 30,000 genes and not 100,000 as we had thought previously. and that the difference between a human being and a rat, genetically speaking, that is, it's of only 300 genes. When I learned about that, I realized, why is it that Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, had so many rats? Brasilia is the seat of Brazilian government. Well, the politicians were human, bipeds, yes, and they spoke, yes, but they were missing 300 genes. And so Dr. Collins ushers forth into the world a vision for a ultimate causality, and echoing the thought processes of Jung and his archetypes. Jung called this the primordial archetype, the universal cause. And using mythology, especially the Greek mythology, he'll use a word very much used by the early Christians until the 3rd century. There are two Greek words, arches and typoi, so old marks. And he created the term archetype. That all of us are the heirs of ancient marks that have come from the primordial archetype, that from a spiritualist perspective is God. If there is a cause from which intelligent life comes, and we go back to the first question of the Spirit's book, God is the supreme intelligence of the universe, primary cause of all things. Because Allan Kardec, the Spiritist codifier, examined how to explain life. Well, if life is expressed through the perfume of the chemical lab within a plant that's able to turn a swamp into sugar and wood, that mud and that muck that came from it came from an intelligent cause. And the intelligent cause is not the offspring of chance, because if it were just by chance, it would only happen once. But because it happens constantly and repeatedly, it's a cause. So this causality, says Jung, and the great Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, is the meaning of life. And the meaning of life must fulfill the psyche of human beings, so they may not become existentially void. And so the alignment was great, and happiness was great with the news brought forth by Dr. Collins, and shares with us in his biography that he has found God because he resorted to the thought of others and shared that this idea of genome led him to God, because in there we could see the history of the present and the story of the past and perhaps the story of the future. Now we can undergo genetic studies and perhaps a test that will not cost us more than $100, and we can find out our origin, that in the year 2000 would not permit, medically speaking, as they were worried about ethics. Because, for instance, if I go to a job and if my boss were to ask me for a DNA test and it shows that maybe I might have an opportunity to develop a cancer, and this took place here when a famous actress, as she took a test and seeing in her inheritance and her genetic that she had the tendency to carcinoma, she preferred to undergo a surgery and remove her breasts and put on implants so that she may not develop breast cancer later. And this practice is being used and leveraged in a way that perhaps betray the purpose of the genome. But if we are going to give somebody a job who shows in their text that they may have a proclivity to an infection or an illness or immune disease, we may not hire that person because I will have an employee who may cost a lot in terms of benefits. And I may also learn about how long I may live, so the ethics, the ethical standards at that time would allow a study and research into human genome, but not much more. But as science dove into this mass to study our physical inheritances, to explain why certain things happen and tendencies exist that are written within our genetic code and very well unfolded and depicted in our intermediary body, which Allan Kardec describes as the perispirit, and that the spiritualist tradition calls astral body. This semi-material body that acts as the organizing model to the physical body. That is to say, that this body is modeled through the DNA that we know through the genome, thanks to the mold, the energetic mold that are our actions from previous lives. And these energetic mold, so to speak, will show certain deficiencies in their DNA and their molecules that are related and correlated to our difficulties in organic and emotional, and what the public sometimes calls the law of karma or dharma, because karma is the rescuing of pain and dharma is the inheritance of love. Two words from Sanskrit. Allan Kardec in Spiritism chooses the words cause and effect. If the cause is noble, if life is well-meaning, it's not, the living is not void. Our DNA and the electrons that build up the particles are harmonious. And the model and the mold is harmonious. And the cells will align themselves in a healthy, in a perfect way, such as the Venus de Milo or the Apollo. Or maybe nowadays like Schwarzenegger. Or any other pattern of beauty, because the beauty patterns and models have changed over time. And nowadays we almost have the body that we want to, because of the cult to the body that we have seen take over the world. And now we have the cult of being that the Greek talked about very properly. They would say, mens agitati molen. That is to say that the soul, the spirit, the psyche moves the body. That the body is that which the mind creates. That we can mold the body. We can organize it. But we cannot avoid the challenges and tragedies that come from heart conditions, for instance, and other illnesses that are written, so to say, in our DNA, and that are part of our spiritual history, because we are not this mess composed of 3 billion genetic codes. We are the energy that is condensated in this mess as a result of our evolutionary process. And if we could define it well, we would say what Albert Einstein said, and which I actually mentioned yesterday as well. The father of the theory of relativity of time and space, that we live in a universe made of waves, minds, energies, and thoughts. That in 1905, when he presented the draft of his theory. But last year, we can also know what the Museum Einstein in Tel Aviv shared with us as they finally unveiled some historic correspondence that he had with his daughter of over thousands of letters. And in one of those letters, Einstein wrote, "I was not a good father. I recognize that I was not a good husband." He actually married twice. Both of them were physicists too. But he goes on, "And I believe and I confess that I did not give you a lot of attention." And daughter lived anonymously. And it was a big surprise when the museum shared those letters. Even his biographers did not know about this. And now he goes on, "I want to write you a letter that's going to shake up scientists everywhere. When I presented my theory, people mocked me. But what I will tell you, it's a lot deeper and more courageous. I want to tell you, daughter, that the universe is maintained by 5 basic forces. According to physics, tells us that the universe is kept together by electromagnetism, by gravity, by the nuclear strong force, and by the weak nuclear force. But there is a bigger one to all of these, and that I put forth of all of them. And I tell you, the universe is maintained by the power of love." When that reached the ears of my scientists colleagues, they will make fun of me, but I tell you that at the root of everything we find love. According, just like our friend who spoke here before, the words from the gospel, according to Spiritism, tells us that love is in the universe. And from a Kardec's perspective, everything is love. In a poetic portrayal, everything is love. It's the tehalet of the universe. It's this activity over these mass of incandescent gases that appeared in the universe 4 billion years ago, after the Big Bang that took place 14 billion years ago. In fact, nowadays we discuss whether the universe did really start at the Big Bang. Because the telescopes, especially the Hubble, who have already fulfilled its useful life but continue to send us pictures, they have found stars who are older than 14 billion of years. And now the science backdates the beginning of the universe to even farther down. Or, at the Aristotelian thought process, have there been other universes? Maybe the universe is not infinite. Perhaps it is a universe that dies and is reborn. And that every second stardust generates new galaxies. And that every second galaxies die, absorbed by the black holes. Maybe that is possible. And before these contemplations, it's hard for this existential void may take place, which are often talked about by Richard Dawkins, the father of modern materialism and atheism, who asked the American government to create an atheist religion, and now we have 10 million Doxians. And this British materialist, to say that Colin's thoughts are really wrong because nothing is really true, and that we're now again in the dark and white thought process in the 70s, when The Dutch religious people believe that they are atheist. Yes, it is true that Jesus exists because there is some documentation from historical anthropological purposes. But they do not believe in God because there is not a proof in the existence of God. That's at least what was put forth in the 1970s. But with the evolution of the scientific thought process, we have reached a crossroads. Either the chance is very intelligent to be causal, or Mr. Chance does not exist. For a good chunk of scientists, yes, there is a cause, an intelligence. And for another slice of scientists, no. But in general, we say that science denies the existence of God. But I ask for your forgiveness to disagree, because science is neutral. Scientists, yes, can deny or affirm the presence of God. However, what fascinates me is that a science that showed up on the 18th of April in 1857 and that brings proof, undeniable proof of the immortality of the soul, Spiritism, through mediumship. When Allan Kardec presented mediumship, in that year that we talked about, 1857, many voices were raised to deny him. And since 1872, William Crookes put forth an analysis around psyche. At that time, we did not know the unconscious or the collective unconscious or the superconscious. Is only part of 1885 that Freud will, with Jean-Martin Charcot and the University of Salpêtrière in Paris, and will find this basement, so to say, where our close memories lie. And later on, with the help of Carl Gustav Jung, they will find an even deeper basement, the unconscious, that Jung classifies as an individual unconscious or a collective one. That which tells our story since conception. Because I have a memory, but that this memory, according to Nat Banerjee, this parapsychologist, is extra cerebral, that is, lies outside the brain, because I have the knowledge of everything that's happened on Earth and that I did not know through the paranormality. But we talked about there were voices being raised to deny the existence of the immortality of the soul. In 1872, William Crookes starts to study the psyches and carries out materialization sessions with girls from 12 to 15 years of old. And on the 12th of May of 1875, William Crookes writes to the Royal Society of London and says, "You have invited me to examine these phenomena and ask whether they are possible, the materializations. I tell you that they are not possible. They are indeed real." Because in his home, through a teenager, a spirit would materialize that he had even photographed, that would take from his safe an object kept inside these huge walls by simply walking the object through the spaces of the molecules in the safe. And the young lady who was materialized there looked different than the medium who was materializing her. And the spirit had a small neck, whereas the medium had a mark on her neck. The being who communicated had a very delicate nails, and the medium used to bite her nails. The being would change height and weight in the scale, and the medium would always remain the same, or 2 kilos less when the meeting was over. The spiritual being played with the Crookes family and gave testimony until the night in which it bade farewell and started to dematerialize from the foot to the top, and sometimes only the head would remain smiling, and say, "Don't wake her up, because she will cry." And Crook saw the spirit and says, "The medium, wake up." And the medium, desperate, and said, "Katie, don't leave me." And before all of those who were in Cook's library that day, they saw Katie King dematerialize completely. So that's a fact that was studied also by Charles Richet. Let's just start by saying that he's a Nobel Prize winner for physiology and was considered the greatest of the wise men from France in the 19th century. He received the Nobel Prize for the advancements in the area of physiology, and he studied this phenomena for 40 years. And in fact also studied a Boston medium, a notable lady that through 40 years demonstrated the immortality of the soul in these great cities, great meetings in Boston. Her name was Eleanor Piper. She passes away at 84 years of age, more deaf than this table. And some reports in the Reader's Digest narrate some of these. The women who see the dead, the women who talk to the beyond, was always sitting down in a square where the spirit manifested, and she did not see that, proving the immortality of the soul. Even here in this beloved New York of us, there is a place where 31 March of 1848 started. And since 1845 they had started. But at that day they became to such a fervor in Hydesville that the chest of Charles Vioma is kept here in Lilydale. So the mediumship phenomena were fought by some voices, and even a science was created, physics, to prove it wrong, and all the theories that physics brought together did not prove useful. And here in 82, parapsychology was created through a couple of psychologists that defined that parapsychology, it's a science that branches off experimental psychology that studies unforeseen facts, unexpected facts. And around 1942, the fathers of parapsychology said that the mind, the thoughts from the mind can be transmitted. The mind that is not physical in nature can know the past. It's called retrocognition. They can understand the future, precognition, or prophecies. And that the dead also come back. Psi phenomena. They're called psi theta because they use Greek letters to take the emotion out of it. Psi is the phenomena and the faculty, and that which happens in the intelligence field is gamma, and what happens in the physical world, it's psi kappa. But there are phenomena that happen beyond both, and they use the first letter from the word death in Greek, thanatos, the T. So through which individuals with the ability theta can prove undeniably the immortality of the soul. But parapsychology could not reach phenomenology because it was observed during that time that the phenomena would reorganize the cells, and so it could produce healing. It was a psychic phenomena with physical effects, and a new science was created psychobiophysics. The idea that our mind has impact greater than a mental one. And by the end of the 50s, a new science was also born to investigate, which were done through photography, through radio recordings, and TV recordings as well. They were brought forth by the Russians, and during the Cold War, and the research undertook by notable psychologists and sensitives from Switzerland. And so these phenomena follow a specific planning. They don't happen when we want them, as normally is a normal science, because it's the result of people's desires. They are produced by intelligent beings that do not necessarily obey the demands of us incarnates. And that is why sometimes we go into attrition when Kuhn studies normal science. Because in science we can say, as we moved these substances, this happens. But we cannot say that a certain spirit will come here now, because he may not want to. Or he could come and may not say anything. So it's a question of free will. So it's very curious indeed. And I'm going to summarize things here with a phenomenon that happened to me. In 1954, I was in the city of São Paulo in Brazil, and I began to lose my voice. After a talk, I would lose my voice, and with a lot of sore throat and throat pain. And I went to a doctor, and he told me that I had a nodule close to my vocal cords. And he told me that I should do a biopsy. That was 1954, to find out whether it was a malign tumor or perhaps it was a benign tumor that could be treated. And all that could be done was radiotherapy at the time. And so I asked to return to Salvador, my home city, where the institute where I worked had a hospital for us. But as I came back from São Paulo, I had the idea of visiting the medium Francis Xavier, who lived in the city of Pedro Leopoldo in the state of Belo Horizonte, between where I was and where I was going. I sent a telegram to Chico, or Francis, and we scheduled a meeting on a Wednesday when he did not have any obligations. I made a trip, stopped in Belo Horizonte, and when I got there without a voice, friends picked me up that very night to see him. We talked, that is to say, he took me to a meeting and asked me for me to speak. And I said I couldn't. And so he gave me a note that I still kept it. Try hard and interpret the gospel. My voice was not good, but I made an effort. And then we went on to 2 a.m. And when I was done, I was even worse. I could barely speak. And he's very happy. He said, "Did you like it, Divaldo?" And I said, "Oh, yes." First of all, because, that part of the country, you always say why first. So what do you have? And I said, "Did you notice now, Chico?" "Oh, no, I noticed before. I'm going to give you some passes." And we were with 3 friends. With Chico Xavier, Francis Xavier, and I were 5 in total. We went to a specific room in a very humble house that room had 1 door and 1 window. And I noticed that his brother had put a sheet over the window. And we have a sheet in Brazil that has different names, the brand. And it was called Sleepwell. But in the South it's called Bicycle for a very simple reason. It's short because if you cover your foot, it won't cover your head. But if it covers your head, it won't cover your foot. like a bicycle moving back and forth. And I saw that sheet on the window. I thought it was weird. There was a table and 5 chairs. Francis got his chair, sat by the table. I closed the door, and my chair was by the door. We turned the lights off, and it was really dark. And he said, "Divaldo, pray." I'm like, that cannot be possible. I was already hurting. And so I closed my eyes, I started to pray. And I was touched because I was praying with my soul. It could be cancer. I was so young. I was 27 years of age. And at that point that I was touched, I heard a voice, a physical voice that said, "Divaldas, open your eyes." So I opened my eyes, and I was shocked. Because before me, there was a young woman, blonde, looking like 16 or 18 years of age, with a head combed in the middle, dressed as a nurse, as the nurses did in the First World War. And she was beautiful, smiling, enlightened. Almost as if inside of her there was a light coming out, that I could even see the bricks on the floor. I had never seen a materialization before, and I looked at her, and she said, "Ich bin Sister Sheila. I am Sister Sheila." And I said, "Sheila." But my voice was horrible. And she said, "I come and do some therapy with your throat, because we are going to need your voice." And I thought, oh God, I was touched. She showed up with something that looked like a pen. However, at the tip, and nowadays it actually exists, but in 1957 it didn't. And at the tip, it looked like a little lamp. I'm going to put this in your mouth and take care of this tumor in your mouth. Are you afraid of pain, Divaldo? And I said, "No, ma'am. Never I will answer that again." She said, "Open your mouth. I'm going to cauterize." I didn't know what cauterization was, so I opened it. She put that little pen, and it was malleable, and it went around my tongue, and I heard it, psst, and I yelled, "That burned me!" Even to my perispirit, to my astral body. I screamed, and I said, "Oh, Lord have mercy." And she said, "Let's do it again." And I said, No, I'm good." And I was speaking, and I noticed. And she said, "Open your mouth, Divaldas." And again, and she burned me again. And I did another, and I screamed again. And after that, she asked me, "How are you doing?" I said, I'm well." And I started to cry. I don't cry often, but I did. And what should I do? Oh my goodness, this is not happening. Because we want facts. And after facts, we want the validation of the facts. And then we want the reconfirmation. And I said, when I leave here, I'm going to think this is a dream. But I see it. And I said, "Sheila, the human soul can be very curious. When I leave here, I will think that all this is my imagination. Is there something that you could give me so that I can take with me as a memento?" And she said, "Yes, Divaldas." She would just call me Divaldas. And so she opened her hand, and before my eyes, little petals of flower started to fall from her hand. So I took a handkerchief, opened it up, and the little flowers fell in it. And all of a sudden, they had the dew in them still. And I recall that I had a Swiss friend that she told me about the flower from the Alps that I'd seen in a movie called Edelweiss. And my friend talked so dearly about the Edelweiss, and I remember the song from the Von Trapp family. And so I loved that. And I said, "Sheila, are you German?" "Yes." Have you ever been to the Alps, the Austrian Alps? Yes. Do you know the Edelweiss? Yes, it is. And in my lap, a flower that looked like that. I looked down with the light coming from her. And she says, "What else, Divaldo?" And I said, "Sheila, I am so sorry. But what if I take a little bit of your tissue?" Yes. And so I took and tore a little square, but I contained myself, not too big. And she said, "What else, Divaldo?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, what should I ask for?" "No, Sheila, I'm done." "Okay, we're going to be friends. We're going to work together." Dr. Bezerra Menezes, the spirit, says, "Take care of your voice." And so she went to take care of Jose Martins Peralta Sobrinho, Carlos Cavalcanti, and Arnaldo Rocha, who were also my friends. And there were 5 friends, 4 of us, and Francis Xavier over the table, maybe 6 feet from me, sleeping, and her bust floating in air talked to us and said, "Until next time." And before our eyes, as snow that disappears in our hands, or the mist that disappears, she disappeared, but left with us a perfume from the flowers in the Alps. I didn't die because I didn't remember that I could die, because I would. And Francis Xavier woke up and says, "How's your voice?" Never, I tell you. I have lost my voice completely since then. Of course, I am tired if you speak for 8 or 10 hours a day. Sometimes I do that. It's only normal that you get tired. But never lost my voice. And in the 71 years of age that I've been hit the road, have I missed a conference or a talk? And when things start to get hard, I say, "Sheila, help me." So that is a fact for which there is no explanation. Because to this day, I still have the piece of tissue, the handkerchief that I use, the Edelweiss, the violets from the Alps. And with carbon, you can measure how old they were. And people can see that in our organization. It's a fact. And now I use the thoughts of Broussais, a Frenchman. Nothing more brutal than a fact. So we have started to find meaning for our lives. And our lives started to have a goal, a purpose. And that emptiness, this being that we are that tries to run away from reality to fantasy, which is a social psychological phenomenon, is now giving way to men and women full of ideals, especially in this difficult moment of history. So as we talked about the men and women who feel the void within them, it's important for us to know that our life has a purpose, and that purpose is fundamental because it's part of our psyche. What is the meaning of our lives? Consumerism? Consumerism is like the water from the ocean. The more that you drink, the more you want to drink. It is a search to fulfill the ice that we keep within ourselves. The emphasis on sex. We live in the search for eroticism or sex, and the whole world is full of it. Our minds, without even thinking about it, we're not even thinking about sexuality. It's like the aura. We are worried about pleasure. But the movie theater, the movies have corrupted us, or we have corrupted the movies. Because in most movies, a woman goes, or the man goes to the bar and drink because they're empty. And in these movies, we can find people trying to find themselves. They break out the cigarettes, they ask for a drink, and the man does as well. And they're also searching for somebody who completes him. But nobody can really fulfill or complement the others. When we love, we give meaning for self-fulfillment. And that is why love is more sublime when it's reciprocated. And so, two of them meet. He also asks for a drink. They smile. They use the drink. And then they have sexual intercourse. And it's curious. When they're done, he lights a cigarette. She does another. And they turn back to back. Because they're done with the sex. They've fulfilled their duty. And so I've noticed that sex is very unpleasant, that needs whiskey for encouragement. But the whiskey is a negative thing because it dilates our blood vessels and relaxes. And without whiskey it's better, and without cigarettes as well. Because it's the moment of relaxation, the organic relaxation, so that our glands, internal, may be replenished, and that the feeling may be expressed. It's a moment of tenderness, of gratitude, of tenderness. To put your head on the chest of a man, or the man who's always trying to put a head in the arm of a woman. Sleep and tenderness. And so this is a communion that takes place, the idealists, but not with those who are empty, who are rushed to finish it, so that as it was established in the United States, that pattern of sexuality where you would have, the most sexually appealing men and women in the country. And now we have the opportunity to see brought forth by a couple, Alfred Kinsley, to produce some reports that changed the way we look at sexuality after World War II, when women finally came forth saying that they were unsatisfied in the sexual world. And these Kinsley reports shook the world, because we finally found out that women are also people, that they also have the right to pleasure and life, and that sex is not a Victorian sin. It's a sublime union between souls. It's a complement of life. It's an exchange of psychic hormones, physical hormones that produce balance, tonus, vitality, that feeds that ideals, and whose forces could be channeled towards an ideal, a family that grows, a work that takes place. I will never forget in which Francis Xavier complained to his spiritual mentor. I was with a friend for 40 years and he humiliated me. I've become a nurse, and he told me, I have 4 different buildings in a rich area, and you, Chico, there you are, still doing the Spiritist thing. You don't have anything, you don't have anybody, abandoned. And so Chico continued, I'm depressed. And his spiritual guide says, why? He wasn't a big deal, but now he's a pharmacist. He's got 4 buildings. And here I am, so poor. I'm alone. First of all, his spiritual guide said, you were married. Me? Who with? With me, he said. With me, with Andrea Louise, with Meme Sheila, and more than 500 authors that have written to you. Oh, but that's not the same. Because what kind of kids do I have? More than 200 to the time. Me? Yes, our books. In my communion with you, and through psychography, and it's a sexual transcendent act. We come together to procreate, so to speak. And so we have already written 200 books together. And I said, I wanted to be unhappy, Divaldo, and the man, my guide, would not let me. But I don't have grandchildren. Yes, you do, the Spirit said. The translations from your books. But my friend, but my friend has 4 buildings, and I don't have anything. No, you have a house that has 2 rooms, 3 living rooms. Why does a body need so much space? But he lived near the beach, she continued. And here you are, you have a lake over here, and the frogs croak, so comfort yourself, and let's go again do a sexual act and write a book. And I said, oh, Divaldo, it's tough. So, this beauty of this idealistic being and the greatness of a body of knowledge that doesn't condemn anything because it gives us free will. Dr. Juan shared yesterday, of course, that we have the freedom to act, but we have to harvest. We can do what we will, but we are responsible for the consequences of our acts. So the proposal that we have for you today, here from our Tri-State Federation, in regards to the existential void, is to avoid this culture of Dawkins, of immediatism, and the frustrations that have taken us to depression, to this pandemia that, according to the World Health Organization, has already affected 360 million people, and that by 2025 will have as its primary cause of death, suicide, even above than cancer and heart attacks. And so Spiritism comes to enrich us and fulfill us with a purpose and objective to which we must apply ourselves so that we can give meaning to our lives. In conclusion, I have a friend, and she's about my age. And she always says she is 60. I am 91. And she was born a year before I did. Because I know how math works out here, but just a while ago she told me, Divaldo, I am so jealous of your happiness. You don't have any problems. I'm like, nope, no problems at all. I am the problem. But I would like to know what is my mission on earth, she said. I said, give me your hands. Let's pray together for our death. Because at 91 years of age, what do you expect? Let's pray together so that we can get in line for the next reincarnation. Because we have lost 90 years thinking about that. And I remember that I was in Miami 2 years ago. And as we ended the activity in March, in one of our meetings, a Brazilian woman approached me and says, have you married already? And I was in doubt whether I was married to Spiritism or not. No, not yet. Why? And she said, no, really. Because I have an aunt that's dying to get married. And I asked her, how is her health? Oh, and then I don't know. I just wonder her if she's really rich, I joked. What do you mean she can live okay? How much does she make a year? I was joking. And I'd like to know her after she told me that. All jokes aside, the lady was actually there, and she went to get her. I am not curious, because men are not curious at all. Some women, maybe. But they tell the husband everything, what do we need to know? But anyways, I looked at her, and there she was, this beautiful little thing. That old thing slowly walking. When I looked at her face, she basically didn't even have a mouth. It was just, skin and lipstick. And said, Aunt, maybe she was a little bit deaf. Aunt, she raised her voice, look, it's Divaldo. Oh, he's single. What? What? Oh, he's a very young man. I said, let's pray, I told her. Because at this time, even the prayers can help us. Are you going to get married? No. I pretend to, I'm hoping to die in peace. And I gave her a hug because, I was trying to be nice. Why? Because I don't have this void within me. I am full of purpose and ideals. And we will continue to talk about that within 30 minutes. We'll have our break now.